files. But now we have import and export. You can export code in one file and then import it in another file. It also allows you to only import certain functions from a file or certain variables. Let me show you how it works. So in this file, we have this capitalized string function where we're passing in the string hello, and we want it to log out the capitalized strings. But right now, it just has an error because there is no capitalized string function in this file. However, in this other file, we do have a capitalized string function. In this string function.js, we have export. This is the export statement I was talking about. And then it's exporting this function. It's actually a variable, capitalized string, that's set to equal a function. This is an arrow function where we pass in a string and then we return the string dot to uppercase. Now, to uppercase is just a string function that makes every letter uppercase. So we can import this in our other file. So let's go back to our other file and I will import. And with the import statement, you're going to use curly braces. And then I'll put capitalize string. And then we have to say what we're importing it from. We want to import it from, and this is where I put the file name. Now, normally you're going to start with a dot slash, which just means the current directory, and I'll type in the file name, string function. Now, the file name has a .js after it, but that's assumed. So you don't have to put .js. You can just put the file name without the extension. So if I run this, you can see hello in all capital letters. It successfully imported this function from the other file, and we used it in this file. I talked a little bit about export in the last lesson, but now I'm going to go into more detail. You export functions and variables from one file so that you can import them into another file. That's how you can reuse different code. So we have this function here. This is a capitalized string function. It actually just capitalizes the first letter of the string and then leaves the rest of the string lowercase. And before I showed you, you can just put export right before here, but we can export a different way. So I'll do export, and then in curly braces, capitalize string. And so now we've just exported this function. And to export a variable like this, we have const foo equals bar, const bar equals foo. To export these variables, you just type in export right before. So now in this file, we're exporting this function and these two variables, and then we could import them into another file. If a file exports multiple different things, you can import each thing individually, or you can import everything. So let me show you how you would import everything from a file. It's just import, and then you're going to put an asterisk or a star, and then you're going to put import as, and then you have to create an object to store everything in. So I'm going to import stuff from a file called capitalized strings. So I'm going to call this capitalize strings. So this could really be anything. I'm creating an object with this, and then I'm going to say what I'm importing it from. And then I just put the file name. In this case, it's just going to be capitalize strings. Sometimes you would have to put a dot slash if it's in the same directory there, and then I'll make sure to put a semicolon at the end. So if you're importing everything, you always start off with import star as, and then this can be anything. It can be any object name that you create, and then you're going to put from, and then you put the file name in quotation marks just like that. Before, when I talked about exports, I was talking about named exports. There's also something called an export default. This is a fallback export, and it's often used if you only want to export one thing from a file. So if you, let's say I want this to be my fallback export, I'm just going to only export this one thing from the file. I can just put export default. So now we know that this is just the fallback, though basically just the one thing we're going to export from this file. So we talked about exporting a default export. Now I'm going to show you how to import a default export. It's pretty much the same as before, but there is a slight difference. So we are going to pretend we have a file called math functions that has a default export name subtract. So let me show you how you would import that. So it's going to be import subtract, and we've already reached the difference here. If it's not a default export, you would put curly braces around this. But it is a default export, so we are not going to use curly braces. But we still have to say what it's from. So from math functions. Okay, so that is how you would import a default export. Well, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, use your code for good.
Hello, welcome to Learn Swift Programming for Beginners, Lesson 1. Today we're going to talk about variables. You're going to learn about what they are, how to declare them in Swift code, and furthermore, how to use them. Alright, so let's get started. For the rest of the lessons in this series, we're going to be working inside this app called Xcode. Xcode is the tool that Apple has provided for people to build apps with. And inside Xcode, you're going to be able to create your user interfaces. You're going to be able to write the code to express the logic in your app. You're going to be able to test your app even. So that's why this is where we're going to start in learning Swift. We're going to be writing the Swift code inside the app that you're actually going to use to build apps with in the future. So this is where you're going to get Xcode. Just go to your browser, go to developer.apple.com/Xcode, or you can launch the Mac App Store on your computer and search for Xcode there. If you're on the web page, you can see that there's this big blue download button up top. Now, ideally, you want to make sure you're using the latest version of Xcode, and right now, as of this recording, it's 8. And you can check your version if you go to Xcode. You can see it here in the welcome screen, and you can also go up here to Xcode about Xcode, and you can see what the version is. If you're a PC user and you're running Windows, there may be some additional work you need to do before you can run Xcode, or you might have to use an alternative solution to build iOS apps. So check in the description below for PC solutions. However, if you are a PC user, don't let that discourage you. For me personally, I lost about 2 to 3 years of learning iOS development simply because I didn't have a Mac and I didn't want to get a Mac. But these days there are alternative solutions. You don't actually have to buy a Mac computer, although I eventually did, and now I haven't looked back. So anyways, now that you have Xcode and after you've installed it, it's a pretty large install. It's a pretty big program. So it might take some time, but after you have it installed and you launch it, you're going to see this welcome screen. You can see here that when you want to create an app for iPhone, iPad, Mac, or whatever, you're going to go to create a new Xcode project, and that's going to start a full out project for you to build an app in. But here we're going to start a new playground because that's going to allow us to type some code quickly. It's going to let us run that code and see the results, and we're not committing to building in a project. It's simply like a sandbox or a playground as it's named. Now, if you don't see this welcome screen, what you can do is just go up to File, New, and hit Playground right there. And that's going to start a new playground for you as well. Or you can just hit this button, Get Started with the Playground. So that's going to launch this dialog for you. And I'm simply going to leave the default name there. Platform should be iOS. And I'm going to save this on my desktop. Okay, so after your playground runs, you'll see up here it's doing a whole bunch of stuff. Launching simulator, getting it ready. And when it's done all that, it's going to say ready. You can already start typing in code. So there you go, it says ready. But when it doesn't say ready and it's doing something, then chances are whatever you're typing here is not going to show up on the right hand side. Okay, we're going to start with a quick tour of this playground window here. So down on the left hand side, I have a bunch of line numbers. Now, if you don't have these and you want them, they can be useful at times, especially when I'm teaching and I need to refer to line numbers. You can go to Xcode Preferences and you can go to Text Editing and you can simply enable line numbers there. Now, this area right here is where we're going to type our Swift code. And it's already got a bunch of stuff for us right here, which we're going to go through in a second. On the right hand side, you're going to see a quick preview of the results of what you typed there. Now, a lot of people have trouble with getting output to show up on this right hand side based on what they type here. Well, one of the things that you can check is just in this status bar up here, make sure that it says ready. And as you're typing something, let's say I change something like that, you're going to see that it, for a brief second there was a little spinner because it's evaluating your code here. If you want it to show up, just make sure it says ready to process your next command, and you should see that output there. Alternatively, there is a tray down here which you may not notice because it's hidden at first. You can hit this button to show the debug area, or there's also this little button here to hide the different panels. Okay, but we don't need to see all of that. But this debug panel may be useful when we start to output things here. This is called the console area, where we can use Swift commands to output things. This blue icon here is to execute the code in your playground. So if you can't get things to show up on the right here, try clicking this button to run your playground. Right now it's blue because you can see there's a little drop down arrow there. If you click and hold it, you can see whether you want to switch it to automatically run, and that's going to run the playground whenever you type something, or you can set it to manually run, and you can see now it's grayed out. So if I type in some new code, it's not actually going to change or display what I have on the right hand side here unless I click the play button to run it. So I would recommend to have it set to automatically run. So now that you know the main areas of the playground, let's get into the meat of today's topic, variables. And in fact, what we have here is a variable. In Swift, a variable holds some data. Now this data could be a value, it could be a reference to an object, or it can even point to a function, which are things that we'll get into the future. But for now, we're going to say that variables hold data. Now, as you can see from this example line of code, a variable has a couple of distinct parts. Let's break it down. Variables need to be declared before they can be used. So this var keyword is used to declare a new variable. Following the var keyword, you have the variable name. In this case, it's str. And really, that's it. You've declared your new variable. So it's got the var keyword and it's got the variable name. Now taking a look at the whole line, what we have on the right hand side there, that's some data. We did say that variables hold data, right? And that equal sign in between the variable name and the piece of data, well, that's an assignment operator. So what we're doing in this line of code is we're declaring a variable called str, and then we're assigning that piece of data to that variable. So now jumping back into the playground, let's see the effect of that. I can say something like print, which is a keyword that is going to print something to that console area down below. So if I say print and then in the parentheses I put str, you can see that it's printed that hello playout srf line down there. On the right hand side, we can see a quick preview of that, and notice that there's a /n here, and that is basically just denoting that there's a new line associated with that print statement, because the next time I print something, it's going to be printed on the next line. So you don't see that here because a new line is just a carriage return or a white space. You can't really see it. But in here in this preview, it's visualized as that /n, which is just a new line. So let's take a look at a couple of different pieces of data that we can store into variables. So I'm going to declare another variable here called a, and I'm going to assign a number into it. So just var1, and I'm going to declare another one called b, which I'm going to also assign 1. And I want to show you that you can perform operations between the variables or on the variables. So for example, I can say print a plus b. And you can see here that the result in the console here is 2. Now notice that when I'm using the variables in an equation or an operation like this, I don't need to use the keyword var because that's only for declaring variables, right? So this little part is declaring the variable, but when you use them afterwards, you just need to refer to them by name. So let's try some other things. Print a minus b, right? Print a times b. Okay, so variables hold data and you can perform operations on variables. Now you can change the data that the variable is holding. So I can say something like a equals 2 now, right? In fact, actually, let's not do it down here. Let's do it here. After we've assigned 1 into a, let's say a equals 2. And as a result, you can see all of these operations have changed because a is now 2. So a plus b is 3, a minus b is 1, and so on, because a is now 2. Now, when you assign something into a different piece of data, it replaces what it was holding on to before. So a is no longer 1. It is now 2. But notice how when we assign a new piece of data into a, we don't have to write var again. That would cause an error because we've already declared that variable up here, and memory in the system has been allocated to it. And so we don't need to redeclare it. All we need to do is assign new data into a, like that. Now, if you're playing around in the playground yourself, you may notice something like, what if you try to assign something into str, like 1? Well, you're going to get an error, and that's because of something called data types, which we're going to learn about in the next lesson. But for now, just know that for str, because we've assigned some text into it up there, if we want to reassign some data into it, again, it has to be text as well. So that would be valid. Furthermore, you can also assign a variable as another variable. So I can say a equals b down here. And in that case, a would now equal 1 again. Well, it was 1 to begin with. So let's say I did that. So if a was 2, and then I said a equals b, then now they would both be 1. Now, before we move on, a quick note on naming variables. Here we have a variable str, and I've named some variables a and b. So normally you wouldn't name variables like a and b because they're not descriptive of the data that they hold. So if you're going to be using variables